Hello, everyone. It's Fred again from Notes of a Nomad, video number 126. Today, I'd like to discuss what I saw and my thoughts and experiences and things I learned when I lived in the apartheid-ridden South Africa from 1963 to 1985, and what I learned and thought about those 22 years. Because unless you've lived there and been there, there's no idea, you have probably most people have no idea what it was like. So I'd like to share that. Now let's start with apartheid and then talk about the potential that I saw in South Africa. So first, apartheid. What was apartheid? Well, it's been described as being institutionalized racial segregation and white supremacy. And if you want to learn about that, I would suggest look up one person who was known as the architect of apartheid. His name was Hendrik Verwoerd. Now, Hendrik Verwoerd, if you want to spell the last name in case you want to look it up, it's Verwoerd. He was born, of all places, in Holland, in Amsterdam, in 1901. But his family moved to Southern Africa when he was about 2 years old. I believe it was 1903. Now, he was a very intelligent, smart student, did very well in school. In fact, studied overseas. I believe he studied in Germany and England and the United States. He ultimately got a PhD in psychology. Now, he was heavily involved with the Afrikaners, who were sad that they had lost, quote unquote, their country during the Boer War to the British. And of course, South Africa was a British colony for many years. But in 1948, the Afrikaners took their country back when the National Party, which was the Afrikaner Party, won the election. Hendrik Verwoerd was part of the Broederbond, which was the secret society of the Afrikaners, planning and scheming on how they could take their country back. He was also made the chief editor of a newspaper, a very popular Afrikaans newspaper, Die Transvaaler. And when the Afrikaans party, National Party, took over, he ultimately, I think it was 1950 to 1958, he became the Minister of Native Affairs, where he implemented many draconian laws, the apartheid laws of separating the races. He called it good neighborliness. In other words, everybody were neighbors, but we're different races, and we'd have our own parts of the country that we could live in and parts of the society. We couldn't, whites and blacks could not live together, etc., and other races as well. You had your own areas. In fact, in some cases, they had their own countries. They created for many of the tribes their own quote unquote countries within South Africa called Bantustans, where they could vote, but for their own electorate, nothing to do with the white part of the country, but they had their own legislatures, etc., so-called, and their own education systems. And there was quite a few Bantustans. There was Ciskei, I think, for the one tribe, I think the Mpondo. The Xhosa was the Transkei. Baputeswana was one where I remember visiting, because Baputeswana, say, it was like Indian reservations in North America, where because they had their own laws, they could have casinos. And there was a big complex of hotels and casinos called Sun City. And in 1983, I recall going to see one of the entertainers, Stewart. What was his first name? Oh, in 1983, Rod Stewart, that was his name. And my wife liked Rod Stewart, so we went to see him. And there were other entertainers who came to Sun City to perform as well. But that was because it was one of the Bantustans. There was a lot of laws. It was a police state. I recall On occasion, I was sort of making suggestions. Some of the things they're doing in the country don't make sense to me. Why are we doing this and that? And I had a knock on the door from my neighbor after a conversation one night. He said, you got to be careful what you're saying. I said, why? He said, well, we have secret police, and somebody will report what you're saying is anti-government, and you could disappear in jail for 180 days because they had this 180-day detention. They don't have to charge you. They just don't like what you're saying. They think you're anti-government. You disappear for 180 days. And if they still don't like what they think you're doing and saying, they will put you in for another 180 days. A lot of people disappeared into jail, never to be heard from for many years under that 180-day detention. So it was a police state. So the military was, a lot of money was spent on that, and the police. And there was an enormous amount of censorship. For example, Nelson Mandela was in jail for 27 years. He was a banned person. You were not allowed to mention his name, not publish it, or any photographs. Totally banned. So he was out of mind. No one ever spoke about him. Didn't even know who he was ultimately. He forgot about it. He'd been in jail for so many years. So that was this environment of the apartheid. However, the potential of the country was enormous. I always said, with the resources there, the mineral resources, the diamond mines, gold mines, platinum, manganese, vanadium, all sorts of minerals, very rich. And the workforce. Well, the blacks were a wonderful workforce. Those working on the mines came, they wanted the money to support their families, maybe to get a dowry to be able to purchase a wife. It was called lobola. To this day, lobola apparently is legal in South Africa, where you pay so many cattle or the equivalent of that for your wife to the wife's family. Anyway, that's workforce was phenomenal. In fact, I'll give you an example. The mining company I worked for had a group of shaft sinkers, and the shaft sinkers, many of them in South Africa, broke world records. They were able to sink shafts faster than anyone else in the world. And because of that, they got contracts overseas. They worked in North America, in Australia, etc. And I met some of the shaft sinkers, and they always said, when we're working overseas, there's one thing we miss, and that is we don't have any of the black laborers that we have in South Africa, particularly from the Basutos. The Basutos, that was the tribe that worked extensively on the shaft sinking. And they said, there's no one else in the world who worked like them. So that's an example of the potential that South Africa had. And there's some other examples. I'll just, I think necessity is the mother of creativity. And I'll share my screen and show you some of the things that have happened in South Africa that are very creative. For example, the world's deepest mine is in South Africa. And if you look at the deepest mines in the world, 8 out of 10 are in South Africa. And the deepest one is the Mopane gold mine, and it is 4 kilometers vertically down. That's 2.5 miles straight down. And it is so hot down there, it's about 150 degrees Fahrenheit. To cool it, they create 6 tons of ice, and they send ice slurry, that's 6 tons of ice slurry down underground to help cool where the people are working so they don't get heat stroke. But that is an example of the technology. And the deepest shaft in the world, the single deepest shaft going down, is also in South Africa. It is over 3.1 kilometers deep. The cable alone, when I was working on the mines, I said, there's no way you could have it that deep because the cable would weigh so much it would break. Anyway, the technology, where there's a will, there's a way, and that's the steepest single lift shaft in the world is in South Africa. So there's an example of some of the creativity and the technology that you find. Another example that I can share with you That's a picture of the headgear of the mine. And this is a picture of some of the gold that when I looked up that they have from that particular deepest mine in the world. A little bit of gold. And apparently that's all from that one gold mine, the deepest one, the one that's 4 kilometers down. So those are examples of why they do it. This is an example of a complex from Sasol. Sasol is sort of South African's conversion of coal into chemicals and petroleum and gas. Because South Africa does not have very much oil, it's found a little bit of oil now. But during the apartheid, they were always afraid that people would say, oh, we won't sell you any oil. So they are the only place in the world, or the only firm in the world, where they are using this technology. And you will find Sasol gas stations around the world, around the country. This is it's a small example of the picture is small, but there's a gas station being filled from Sasol, which is gasoline made from coal. So there's an example of technology that they've developed in South Africa. And lastly, but not least, there's some other technologies that they have developed, which I won't go into, but the military equipment. They had some outstanding world-class military equipment. And that, in my opinion, shows the skills and the creativity that's available in South Africa. Now, Nelson Mandela, in my opinion, was a wonderful man for many reasons. When he got out of jail, instead of the chaos, he tried to unite everybody and say, hey, we're not going to fight, we're going to work together and build this country. Unfortunately, he was only prime minister for 5 years, I guess because he'd been in jail so long and he was around 80 years old. He didn't have enough time. But this example of the spirit of Ubuntu, which is the profound African sense that we are human only through the humanity of other human beings, and it's not a parochial phenomena, but has added globally to our common search for a better world. And Nelson Mandela, in my opinion, has a very big impact. Unfortunately, he wasn't around long enough to implement all of that, what he was trying to do in the world, and particularly in South Africa. So those are my thoughts and experiences. South Africa during apartheid was a police state, but it had enormous potential. The people there were phenomenal, very intelligent, very creative in all aspects, and they worked hard. It was a wonderful workforce, and the potential of that country, it could have been a leader in the third world countries. Unfortunately, it has not come to fruition, and I blame a lot of that because of what the scene was said during apartheid. So those are my thoughts and experiences from the 22 years that I spent in South Africa during the apartheid era. So with that, I will say adios, au revoir, wishing you, your family and friends, lots of love and laughter. Bye for now, from Fred and Notes of a Nomad.